Hi, I'm Melba Pearson, also known as the Resident Legal Diva, and it's time for another Ask the Diva. Now make sure to subscribe to Legal AF right down here, and then you can get all the happenings and all the explainers with everything having to do with this current presidential administration. So the question of the week comes from Corpus Curiosa. Love that name. And it's a multi-part question, so there's a lot to dive into here. Now, this was in response to the video where I talked about the lack of diversity in this current presidential cabinet. And so the question was more in terms of the process of getting rid of a congressperson or a member of the House of Representatives before midterms. What other ways are possible aside from a member having to step down voluntarily? Can they be impeached or somehow legally booted out? And the second part to the question is, what happens if the president and then the vice president are impeached for the same reason, like treason? So, very good question. Let me break that down for y'all. All right, so first off, in order to get rid of a congressperson before the midterms, you basically have four options. And none of it kind of really has to do with us. Hate to say that. So first off, pathway one is death. So if a member of Congress has an untimely death, then obviously that's the end of that. Second pathway is resignation for whatever reason. So of course they step down and then a special election or something along those lines will occur. The other option is expulsion, which is a bit more on the rare side. And so the House of Representatives or the Senate can expel one of their own members with a 2/3 vote from whatever chamber. So if the House of Representatives wants to boot somebody out, they need to have a 2/3 vote of the members of Congress in the House of Representatives to expel the person. If it's less than 2/3, the person stays. If it's more than 2/3, the representative is out. Same thing in the Senate. This is a severe form of punishment that's usually only used for extreme cases of misconduct. So you're looking at bribery, treason, serious offenses like that. And just giving you a quick history on the expulsion clause. So courts basically have declined to get involved with it. They kind of are like, all right, this is a Congress thing. We're going to stay out of it. So they haven't really set a lot of guardrails. But to date, 20 members of Congress have been expelled. 5 from the House, 15 from the Senate. A large majority of those folks who got expelled, it was as a result of the members' behavior that was deemed to be disloyal to the United States at the outset of the Civil War. There's that. And then more recently, you had 2 expulsions as a result of the members being convicted on public corruption charges. So that kind of will give you the precedent of how often expulsion is used and for what purposes. The last pathway for a Congress member to be out of office before the midterms is they've accepted an incompatible public office. So if you've gotten another public office, whether you've been appointed or you were elected, you have to give up your congressional duties. So if you're appointed, let's say, to this administration as whatever, Secretary of the Interior, whatever, I'm not saying that's the actual pathway, but I'm just giving that office as an example. Then if you're a current member of Congress, you get appointed to be Secretary of the Interior, you obviously have to leave your congressional seat, and then that process goes forward as need be. So those are the ways. And so basically, sum and substance, we don't have a mechanism for doing, let's say, a recall election to basically pull a member of Congress out of office. So that's why elections are so important, and elections have consequences, because you don't get a mulligan, you don't get a do-over, right? Like, midterm elections, you got to show up the same way you show up for the presidential elections and, of course, your local elections as well, because those are the folks that have a huge impact on your day-to-day life. That's a side note. But basically, sum and substance, not a whole lot of ways you can get rid of a congressperson, and we, the people, don't really have the power to do so. Now, second part of the question, what happens if the president and vice president are impeached? Well, first off, let me break down the whole process there. First off, the House of Representatives have to bring charges. They have to be like, okay, boom, we want to impeach this president and vice president for these reasons, right? Then it's up to the Senate. The Senate has to vote to convict them after a hearing, a trial, basically. And the Senate has to convict with a 2/3 vote. See, 2/3 is a key number here. If they get to that number, then it's impeachment. If they don't get to that number, business as usual. Now, if they vote to convict, then the president, and in this scenario, president and vice president, would both be removed from office. At that point, the 25th Amendment to the Constitution kicks in. And that basically lays out the succession plan for what happens if the president is incapacitated. So president is incapacitated, vice president becomes president. If the president and the vice president become incapacitated, who's next? The Speaker of the House. That would be Mike Johnson. Yeah. You let me know if you want him as president. I'll just leave that there. If that were to happen, then the House of Representatives would elect a new speaker, and then the president, which would be the former Speaker of the House, would then appoint a vice president, and then we'd move on from there. So here's your full list of what would happen. And I'm laughing because I think getting rid of the president and the vice president might be jumping out of the frying pan and into the fire. So y'all tell me and sound off in the comments on what you think about that. So the full list of what it would look like. Obviously, if the president is incapacitated, the vice president, J.D. Vance, would take over. If the president and vice president are incapacitated, then comes the Speaker of the House, currently Mike Johnson. If he's incapacitated, next up is President pro tempore of the Senate, which is currently held by Chuck Grassley, Republican out of Iowa. If he's incapacitated, next up would be Secretary of State Marco Rubio. If he's incapacitated, next up would be Secretary of the Treasury Scott Bessent. If he's incapacitated, that is Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth. And yeah, I know y'all would love this. If he was incapacitated, next up would be Attorney General Pam Bondi. So as you can see, the line of succession is probably not favorable for folks who are not aligned with what the president and vice president are currently doing, which is why elections are important. And elections have consequences because, of course, the president is going to appoint people that are sympathetic to their worldview. And in this instance, not so much for democracy, right? So there you have it. So that's why I encourage everyone, think real deep before you leap, before you go ahead and bubble in that name, whether you're at the voting booth or if you're doing your vote by mail ballot, take the opportunity to learn about the people you're voting for. Look at the pros and cons. Look at reputable websites. Don't just follow what's being said on social media or by your friends or whatever. Look for reputable, nonpartisan sites to be able to give you a balanced overview of what the candidates stand for so you know exactly what you're voting for. Because again, elections have consequences. I'm Melba Pearson, also known as the Resident Legal Diva, and this was Ask the Diva. Take care.
Can't get your fill of Legal AF? Me neither. That's why we formed the Legal AF Substack. Every time we mention something in a hot take, whether it's a court filing or a oral argument, come over to the Substack. You'll find the court filing and the oral argument there, including a daily roundup that I do called, wait for it, Morning AF. What else? All the other contributors from Legal AF are there as well. We got some new reporting. We got interviews. We got ad-free versions of the podcast and hot takes. Where? Legal AF on Substack. Come over now to free subscribe.